Hi and welcome to another Blain's Morning Porridge. This one, 24th of September 2025. Today, worry less about gilts and more about US Treasuries. As always, let me start off with a quote. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the kingdom was lost. And I suppose that quote, which I believe relates to Richard III at Bosworth, is an example of what we Brits are really good at, and it's making things difficult for ourselves. We talk ourselves down and fall into doom and gloom on a regular basis, despite knowing for certain that the sun is going to come up tomorrow. Things are never as bad as we fear, but seldom as good as we hope, and that's actually one of my market mantras. At the moment, though, it sure feels bad here in Blighty. Now, I'm going to spend part of the weekend scribbling comments for next week's UK Mortgage Finance Conference in London, and I'm going to try really hard not to be the most miserable person in the room, but I really worry about UK accommodation. The UK is in danger of squandering a whole generation of our young workers because they cannot get basic accommodation security. They can't build their careers or start family formation because there is no social or affordable housing. They can't even begin to think about getting on the housing ladder with London salaries and London jobs. And the thing is, the success of the UK depends on them contributing to the economy. I'm going to rant about it at the conference, but it is going to sink the economy unless we find swift solutions. Meanwhile, the UK's last significant car manufacturer, Jaguar Land Rover, is in absolute crisis and meltdown. The factory gates are closed because someone didn't take the decision to spend money on cybersecurity. Now the firm is effectively shuttered because of its compromised IT systems. As a result, smaller companies, the suppliers all around the UK, are in crisis because their orders are being cancelled and delayed. The knock-on effects on the automotive supply chain across the UK economy could actually unravel the OECD's recently improved outlook for the UK, although it still predicts inflation will remain stubbornly high. Now, based on the kind of comments you see in the Telegraph and the other right-wing papers every morning, I'm sure someone's going to blame Sir Keir Starmer for Land Rover's crisis, but the reality is it's just down to that one bad business decision not to spend on cybersecurity. That should be a lesson to everyone. The reality is that Land Rover, an Indian-owned firm, could well require a government bailout of the automotive supply sector, one of the UK's few global-scale manufacturing businesses. Now, there is good news in the market, and part of that is that London is not under Sharia law, as US President Donald Trump claimed at the United Nations earlier this week. Figure it for yourself, though. London has Sir Sadiq Khan. America has Donald Trump. You choose. It was a truly extraordinary speech, and we were once worried about Joe Biden. I guess the US will probably chuck the United Nations out of New York. After all, it was one of these beastly foreigners who pulled the plug on the escalator. You gotta giggle sometimes. America, such confidence, such strength. And next week, Donald Trump is going to demonstrate his leadership by cancelling a meeting with the top congressional Democrat leaders to discuss an imminent government funding crisis in the USA. Next week, the entire government could be shut down because it's hit its debt ceiling. Now, Trump doesn't think it could possibly be productive to meet the Democrats. I guess his strategy is to force them to block the 60% congressional approval that would be required to raise the ceiling, or they accept his plans. If they don't, then he can blame them when it all goes to rackshit and the government closes down. Or maybe he'll just declare them economic terrorists and deport them all. Now, deep down, in the depths of my soul, I know that the UK must be in serious trouble, because yesterday I found myself agreeing with the Liberal Democrats. That's never happened before. I think they might be right. Given the dire state of the Tories and the Labour dither, they might be the only alternative for Farage and Reform at the next election. Reform is dedicated to importing MAGA populism to the UK. That's not much of a choice compared to liberalism. Meanwhile, the populist Reform Party is continuing to destabilise the whole economy by reminding us that it's all Chancellor Reeves' fault that the national accounts look to be in such a mess. They claim the black hole in the budget has deepened to unplumbed depths, witnessed by the Office for Budget Responsibility scaling back its productivity estimates and making the problem even worse, and therefore it's the fault of the Labour government. And they are telling us that November's budget will sink the ship. Steady, Nigel. The crisis in the UK has been an awful long term coming. It wasn't even just the last 14 years of conservatism that have caused it. The problems go back much, much deeper. On a relative basis, though, the productivity of the UK has plummeted compared to the rest of Europe, largely due to, well, guess what? Brexit. I believe that was Mr. Farage's pet project. The consequences of Brexit are still impacting the economy 9 years after it happened in terms of trade and investment into the UK. Now, most of our largest businesses have been bought by foreign companies, but they are no longer the gateway to the 900 million odd European consumers that they once were. And the rest of the UK economy is largely the government, which is largely bust. However, I suspect there is another more fundamental reason for the UK's appalling worker productivity, and that's that UK businesses and government services appear to have lost sight of their basic purpose. Just ask yourself this: how much time do you spend each week on the internet or your mobile phone on terminal death hold to your bank, your energy company, the council, or whoever? These are all truly awful experiences, and they eat up much of our precious time. And they're all a result of bad business decisions, cutting costs and losing sight of the purpose. And if you really want to understand the productivity crisis at the heart of the UK, well, just try calling your local energy firm. I had it this week. I've bought a new car and it's a plug-in hybrid, which means I need a fast charger fitted at home, which meant calling the electric firm. I tried to order online, didn't work. I had to call them 3 times. I held for 30 minutes, being told how important my call was to them before they cut me off bang on 30 minutes. And apparently that's so they can show the regulator that all calls are answered within 30 minutes. If they're cut off, they don't count. The 4th time I got lucky, I think, and I was picked up by an utterly disinterested young lady who suggested I should order online. She wasn't very impressed when I explained that the online ordering system didn't work. Anyway, the new car is on its way to us from Tokyo, and it will likely arrive before we get the charger fitted from the stock that we know is in the warehouse just down the road. Well, I'm being typically British out here, aren't I? I'm being miserable. That's one of the things that makes us British. The reality is, things are never really as bad as they look. And that is probably as true today as it's always been. There are reasons to hope. One such story is that the headline in the FT this morning is how the US bond giant PIMCO is buying UK government gilts. They reckon UK expectations of inflation are overblown and that the Bank of England will soon be able to start easing, flattening the yield curve, bringing down the long gilt yield that the right wing were telling us meant the end of everything. The bet is essentially very simple, that the UK is being priced by the market as a basket case, but in fact is pretty much in line and better than many of the other heavily indebted struggling nations. Now, there have been factors that have caused UK inflation to spike higher recently, like rising employer contributions and rising minimum wages, but these are now going to fade in their importance. In many ways, the UK is actually much better off than we think. We have genuine economic and monetary sovereignty over our economy and our currency. The gilt market remains one of the most resilient markets, much more so than the headlines have recently painted, and that's demonstrated by the ongoing success of gilt auctions. That resilience is based on the strength of the market structure. We actually have a relatively low debt GDP compared to other nations, and we have the longest duration maturity of our debt amongst all the other G7 nations. And then there is the professionalism of the market itself, which is led by the UK's Debt Management Office. Now, if the current Labour government had a coherent plan to address the budget hole with a well-considered, thought-out and fully costed spending plan, which they could explain competently to the market and the electorate, then the gilts market would be happy enough to buy more. You can call that the reverse Liz Truss plan. Liz Truss' plan was just to tell everyone she was going to cut taxes and spend more. Bond market didn't like it. But tell them why, and they'll understand. Because remember, all they care about is getting repaid interest and principal. And a country that has a plan to succeed is far more likely to succeed than one that doesn't. What the market is looking for is a more competent government that looks and sounds like it knows what it's doing and has a structure that will make it happen behind it. And speaking of government competency, that's why I'm far less worried about gilts than I am about US Treasuries. Anyway, that's it for today's Morning Porridge comment. You can find the Morning Porridge on the website www.morningporridge.com, where you can subscribe and receive a morning comment every morning. This comment on YouTube usually follows a day or so later. It is a subscription service, but there is a free service available. Any comments, look forward to them, and I'll be back later with something new. Thank you all very much.